I'm recording this for my safety. This is my car.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get in and leave.
No.
Please stop blocking my way.
I've never seen you around here. This spot isn't for people just showing up like this. You need to explain why you're here.
Why are you filming us? That feels aggressive. Are you trying to start something? Turn the camera off right now.
The smartphone camera was already recording when the shouting started. What began as a simple afternoon walk through the neighborhood park on a quiet Sunday afternoon turned into a viral moment that would destroy 2 lives and change another forever. The small park in front of a residential home was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would rack up over 45 million views in just 4 days, spark national outrage, and prove that, in the age of technology, racism comes with a price tag that some people simply cannot afford to pay. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. The woman at the center of this storm was named Jennifer, a 29-year-old graphic designer who had moved to the suburban neighborhood just 8 months earlier. She drove a modest hatchback and lived a quiet life, spending most of her time working from home and occasionally meeting friends at local tea shops. Nothing about Jennifer screamed confrontation or drama. She was the kind of person who helped elderly neighbors with their yard work and always picked up litter she found on the sidewalk. That Sunday, Jennifer had one goal: take a relaxing walk through the neighborhood park and get home in time to finish a client project. She had parked her car on the street near the small park, made sure she was within the posted parking area, and headed out for her stroll. The whole walk took maybe 20 minutes. She enjoyed the fresh air, watched children playing, and stopped to admire some flowers. Normal, boring, forgettable. But when she walked back to her car, keys in hand, she noticed something strange. A large SUV had parked extremely close behind her vehicle, so close that she would have difficulty backing out. Standing next to the SUV were 2 people, a man and a woman, both appearing to be in their late 40s. The man was tall with a blue windbreaker, and the woman wore a visor despite the overcast weather. Jennifer tried to ignore them and began unlocking her car door. That's when the woman said something that made her freeze. She told her she didn't belong in this neighborhood. Jennifer looked up, confused. She asked what she meant, though somewhere in her gut, she already knew. The woman stepped closer, her voice getting louder. She said this was a nice area, a safe area, and people like her were the reason crime was going up. The man in the blue windbreaker nodded along, arms crossed over his chest, blocking the narrow space between their vehicles. Now, here's where Jennifer made a decision that would prove to be brilliant. Instead of engaging, instead of arguing, she calmly pulled out her phone and started recording. She didn't hide it. She held it up clearly, making sure the camera captured both of their faces. The moment that camera came out, something shifted. The woman's voice got even louder, more aggressive. She started saying Jennifer was threatening them by recording. The man in the blue windbreaker stepped forward, pointing his finger directly at the camera. He demanded Jennifer stop recording and leave immediately, even though Jennifer's car was right there, and she had every right to be parked on that public street. Jennifer kept her voice calm and steady. She explained she was simply getting into her own car and would appreciate if they moved so she could leave. Simple, reasonable, clear. That's when things escalated dramatically. The woman suddenly pulled out her own phone and dialed. Within seconds, she was speaking to emergency services, and what she said next would become the focal point of the entire case. She reported that an Asian woman was harassing her and her husband in front of their home, that she was acting aggressive, threatening them, and she feared for her safety. She described Jennifer as confrontational and intimidating, saying she had approached them and wouldn't leave them alone. Every single word was a lie, and every single word was being captured on Jennifer's camera. The man in the blue windbreaker seemed emboldened by this. He moved even closer to Jennifer, invading her personal space, his face now just inches from the camera. He said things that cannot be fully repeated here, racial slurs, mixed with threats, telling Jennifer that the police were coming and she would be arrested. The woman joined in, creating a chorus of hateful words that echoed across the quiet residential street. Other neighbors began to notice. A few stopped to watch from their front yards. One older woman started walking over, asking if everything was okay, but the couple turned their anger toward her too, telling her to mind her own business. Jennifer remained remarkably composed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make threats. She simply kept recording and waited. She knew the truth was on her side, and she knew that in about 5 to 10 minutes, police officers would arrive and see the situation for themselves. Quick question for you watching. Have you ever witnessed something like this in public? Type yes in the comments if you have. When the police cruiser pulled up to the curb, the couple's demeanor changed instantly. The woman rushed toward the officers, practically stumbling over her words as she pointed at Jennifer. She painted herself as the victim, claiming she and her husband were in front of their home when this woman approached them, started recording without permission, and made them feel unsafe. The officer, a younger cop named Marcus, listened patiently. Then he walked over to Jennifer, who was still standing by her car, phone in hand. Marcus asked what happened, and Jennifer explained calmly. She mentioned she had the entire interaction on video starting from the moment the harassment began. Marcus asked if he could see the video. Jennifer played it from the beginning. The officer watched in silence, his expression changing as the minutes ticked by. He watched the woman make false statements on her emergency call. He heard the racial slurs. He saw the man blocking Jennifer's access to her own vehicle. When the video ended, Marcus asked Jennifer to send him a copy immediately. Then Marcus walked back to the couple. What happened next surprised everyone watching. The officer told them both that based on the video evidence, they were being detained for filing a false police report. The woman's face went pale. The man in the blue windbreaker started arguing, raising his voice, demanding to speak to Marcus's supervisor. A second officer had arrived by this point, a man named Officer Chen. Between the two officers, they managed to keep the situation under control, but the couple was not going quietly. The woman started crying, saying this was all a misunderstanding, that she really did feel threatened. The man accused Jennifer of editing the video somehow, of setting them up. But videos don't lie, especially not ones that run continuously, without cuts. Here's where the story takes an interesting turn. One of the bystanders who had been watching a teenage boy came forward and told the officers that he had also recorded part of the incident on his phone. He had started filming when he heard the yelling, capturing the interaction from a completely different angle. His video corroborated everything Jennifer had shown. The couple, whose names were revealed later as Richard and Helen, were placed in handcuffs. Richard continued yelling, attracting even more attention from neighbors. Helen had gone silent, her face buried in her hands. They were put into separate police cars and taken to the local station. Jennifer was asked if she wanted to press additional charges beyond the false report. The officers explained that what she experienced could qualify as harassment, intimidation, and possibly even a hate crime, depending on how the prosecutor's office wanted to handle it. Jennifer didn't need to think long. She said yes to all of it. Before leaving the scene, Jennifer made a decision that would amplify this story beyond anything she initially imagined. She uploaded the full video to social media. She didn't edit it. She didn't add dramatic music or commentary. She simply posted the raw footage with a caption explaining what happened and expressing her exhaustion with these kinds of encounters. The video went live at around 3:00 in the afternoon. By 7 that evening, it had been viewed 3 million times. By midnight, it was trending nationally. By Monday morning, news outlets were calling Jennifer for interviews. Legal experts were analyzing the footage on television, and Richard and Helen's names and faces were plastered across the internet. The internet did what the internet does best. It investigated. Within hours, people discovered that Richard owned a small plumbing business. Helen worked as a dental hygienist. Both had social media profiles, which they had apparently forgotten to set to private. Screenshots of past posts began circulating, revealing a pattern of questionable views and comments that suddenly made their park behavior seem less like an isolated incident and more like a glimpse into who they really were. Richard's business page was flooded with negative reviews. People called his company, leaving voicemails expressing their disgust. His business email was overwhelmed. By Monday afternoon, 4 clients had publicly announced they were terminating their contracts with him. Helen's dental office received similar treatment. Her employer, a dentist who had built his practice on community trust and reputation, released a statement by Monday evening. It announced that Helen was no longer employed at the practice, effective immediately. The statement didn't go into details, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly why. But the legal consequences were just beginning. On Tuesday morning, the prosecutor's office reviewed the case. They watched the video, read the police reports, and interviewed both officers who responded to the scene. By Tuesday afternoon, formal charges were filed. Richard and Helen each faced charges of filing a false police report, harassment, and disorderly conduct. The prosecutor also added a hate crime enhancement, which in that state could significantly increase penalties. The hate crime enhancement was the critical piece. It transformed what might have been a misdemeanor slap on the wrist into something with real weight. If convicted on all counts, Richard and Helen were each looking at potential jail time, heavy fines, and a permanent criminal record. Their lawyer, a private attorney they hired after being released on bail, tried to do damage control. He released a statement claiming his clients had simply misread the situation, that it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, and that they deeply regretted any offense caused. The statement landed like a lead balloon. Social media tore it apart within minutes. How do you misread a situation when you're the one doing the harassing? How do you accidentally make a false police report? How do you mistakenly use racial slurs? Do you think their apology was genuine or just damage control? Let me know what you think in the comments. The court proceedings took several months, as these things usually do. Richard and Helen initially pleaded not guilty, apparently hoping they could somehow fight the charges despite the overwhelming video evidence. Their attorney attempted various strategies, including trying to get the video excluded from evidence by claiming Jennifer hadn't informed his clients they were being recorded. That argument failed. The state had single-party consent laws for recording, meaning Jennifer had every legal right to record the conversation she was part of. Additionally, the interaction took place on a public street where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. The attorney then tried to argue that the words used, while offensive, didn't rise to the level of a hate crime. That argument also struggled, especially when the prosecution brought in expert witnesses who explained the historical context and impact of the specific slurs used. As the trial date approached, something interesting happened. The prosecution offered a plea deal. If Richard and Helen pleaded guilty to the harassment and false report charges, the state would drop the hate crime enhancement. They would face probation, community service, fines, and mandatory counseling, but likely no jail time for a first offense. It was a generous offer, all things considered. Richard wanted to reject it. According to sources close to the case, he still believed he could win at trial, that a jury would see things his way. Helen, on the other hand, wanted to take the deal. She understood that going to trial meant that video would be played in court, analyzed frame by frame, with her face and words displayed for the jury and any media present. Their lawyer apparently spent hours convincing Richard that trial was a terrible idea. The evidence was ironclad. The video had been authenticated. They had no credible defense. A jury trial would be a gamble they were almost certain to lose. And if they lost, the penalties would be much harsher. Finally, reluctantly, Richard agreed. On a Thursday morning in late autumn, 9 months after the park incident, Richard and Helen stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to harassment and filing a false police report. The disorderly conduct charges were dropped as part of the agreement. The judge, a no-nonsense man who had been on the bench for over 25 years, accepted the pleas but made it clear during sentencing that he was not happy about the plea deal. He stated for the record that the behavior displayed in front of that home was reprehensible, dangerous, and exactly the kind of thing that erodes community trust and puts innocent people at risk. Richard was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 320 hours of community service, a fine of $5,500, and mandatory participation in a racial bias education program. Helen received the same, though her community service hours were set at 270. Additionally, both were ordered to have no contact with Jennifer directly or indirectly for a period of 5 years. Violating that order would result in immediate jail time. The judge also did something unusual. He ordered that, as part of their community service, both Richard and Helen had to give presentations at local schools and community centers about the consequences of racism and false police reports. They would have to stand in front of audiences and explain what they did, why it was wrong, and what they learned. Imagine that, having to repeatedly relive your worst moment, admit your failures, and try to convince strangers that you've changed. But the legal consequences were only part of their punishment. The social consequences proved to be just as devastating, if not more so. Richard's plumbing business never recovered. Even after the news cycle moved on, the damage was done. Other contractors didn't want to work with him. Clients didn't want to hire him. His reputation in the community was destroyed. Within a year of the incident, he was forced to close the business entirely. He ended up taking a job working for someone else's company, making a fraction of what he used to earn. Helen faced similar struggles. No dental office would hire her. Her face was too recognizable, her name too associated with the incident. She tried applying to offices in neighboring towns, but word had spread. She eventually left the dental field altogether and found work doing data entry for a small company with minimal public interaction. Their personal lives suffered too. Friends distanced themselves. Family members gave interviews to media saying they were ashamed and hadn't realized the extent of Richard and Helen's views. The couple's own relationship reportedly became strained under the pressure, though they remained together. Meanwhile, Jennifer tried to return to normal life, though normal had fundamentally changed. The video's virality brought opportunities she never expected. She was invited to speak at conferences about her experience. A civil rights organization asked her to join their advisory board. Multiple media outlets wanted exclusive interviews. Jennifer handled it with the same calm composure she showed in that part. She gave a few interviews, always staying focused on the bigger picture rather than personal revenge. She talked about the systemic issues that made incidents like hers possible. She emphasized that she was lucky that she had video evidence and witnesses, but countless others faced similar situations without those protections. She also filed a civil lawsuit against Richard and Helen for emotional distress and defamation. That case settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, with the money reportedly going to organizations that support victims of racial harassment. The teenage boy who had also recorded the incident used his unexpected platform to start a social media campaign, encouraging bystanders to film and speak up when they witness injustice. His campaign gained significant traction, especially among young people. The police department used the incident as a training example, showing officers how easily situations can be misrepresented and why body cameras and thorough investigation matter. Officer Marcus and Officer Chen were commended for their handling of the situation, for not making assumptions, and for letting the evidence guide their actions. The neighborhood association installed additional security cameras throughout the residential area and created guidelines for how to respond to harassment incidents on their streets. Have you been keeping up with the story? Type justice if you think the outcome was fair. Now, you might be wondering if Richard and Helen truly learned anything from this experience. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? According to people who attended their mandatory presentations, the couple's evolution was gradual and uncertain. Early presentations felt scripted and hollow, like they were just going through the motions to satisfy the court. But over time, particularly for Helen, something seemed to shift. She began speaking more candidly about her upbringing, the unchallenged beliefs she carried, and the shock of seeing herself through the world's eyes. Richard's transformation appeared less complete. Those who heard him speak said he focused more on the consequences he faced than the harm he caused. He talked about losing his business and his reputation, sometimes in ways that felt like he was positioning himself as a victim of cancel culture, rather than someone who faced consequences for his own actions. But here's what matters. Regardless of whether they truly changed internally, their actions had external consequences that sent a message far beyond one park in one suburban neighborhood. The video became a teaching tool. Universities used it in sociology classes. Diversity training programs incorporated it into their curricula. It was shown at police academies as an example of false reporting and implicit bias. Thousands of people saw what happened to Richard and Helen and understood, perhaps for the first time, that racism isn't just morally wrong, it can be legally costly. That using the police as a weapon against people of color can result in criminal charges. That in the age of smartphones, your worst moment can become permanent and public. The case also sparked broader conversations about false police reports, particularly those weaponizing law enforcement against Asian individuals. Several states began introducing or strengthening laws, specifically addressing racially motivated false reports, sometimes called legislation, in honor of victims who weren't as fortunate as Jennifer. Legal experts pointed to this case as an example of the justice system working as intended. The evidence was clear, the prosecution was appropriate, and the consequences fit the crime. It wasn't perfect, they noted, but it was progress. 3 years after the incident, Jennifer did one final interview about the experience. She was asked if she thought justice had been served. Her answer was measured. She said that justice for her personally, perhaps yes, but justice in the broader sense, required more than one case, more than one verdict. It required systemic change, cultural shifts, and ongoing commitment to equality. She also said something that stuck with many people who heard it. The saddest part wasn't what happened to her in that park. She had survived worse. The saddest part was knowing that her experience wasn't unique, that somewhere that very same day, someone else was probably being harassed, threatened, or falsely reported, and maybe they didn't have a camera or witnesses or officers who believed them. That statement put the entire incident into perspective. This wasn't just a story about two racist people facing consequences. It was a window into a much larger problem, one that persists despite laws, despite videos, despite consequences. The story of what happened in that park is ultimately about accountability. It's about evidence and truth prevailing over lies. It's about ordinary people, with cameras becoming accidental activists. It's about the justice system occasionally getting it right. And it's about the fact that actions, especially hateful ones, can carry consequences that extend far beyond the moment they occur. Richard and Helen walked into that situation, thinking they could intimidate someone with impunity, that their words would disappear into the air, that no one would challenge them. They were wrong on every count. Their brief moment of hatred cost them their careers, their reputations, their financial stability, and years of their freedom through probation and mandated service. Was it enough? That depends on who you ask. Some people thought the penalties were too lenient, that hate crimes deserve harsher punishment. Others thought the social consequences, the public shaming, and the career destruction were punishment beyond what the legal system imposed. But almost everyone agreed on this. Jennifer deserved better. She deserved to take a walk and go home without being harassed. She deserved to exist in her neighborhood without being told she didn't belong. She deserved basic human dignity and respect. The fact that she had to fight for those things, that she had to record evidence and press charges, and relive the trauma through legal proceedings, points to the work still left to do. So there you have it, a simple walk in the park that turned into a national conversation about racism, accountability, and justice. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you think about this case. Should the consequences have been harsher? Was justice truly served?